as a human being, that what he does, he sits there and all day long, and he waits for me to, for 10 minutes that I might make use of it.
He built the world's largest shipping fleet, married one of America's most beloved women, and lived like a king on his own private island. Then tragedy struck, and the golden tycoon crumbled. This is Wealth, Women, and Tragedy Ahau, the fall of Aristotle Onassis. Aristotle Socrates Onassis was born on January 20th, 1906, in Karatau, a suburb of Smyrna in the Ottoman Empire. Today, that city is known as Izmir, Turkey, but in 1906 it was a thriving port with a large Greek population. Aristotle's father, Socrates Onassis, was a successful tobacco merchant who had built a comfortable life for his family. His mother, Penelope Dologlou, was a beautiful young woman who gave birth to a daughter, Artemis, in 1904, and to Aristotle 2 years later. The Onassis family lived well. Socrates sent his children to prestigious schools, and by the time Aristotle graduated from the evangelical Greek school at 16, he spoke 4 languages: Greek, Turkish, English, and Spanish. He was bright but rebellious, frequently getting suspended from school, much to his father's frustration. Socrates worried about his son's future and hoped Aristotle would take over the family's tobacco business. But tragedy struck the family when Aristotle was only 6 years old. In 1912, his mother Penelope died following surgery. Her death left a void in the household that was never filled. Socrates' mother Gethsemane came to Smyrna to care for the children, but 18 months later, Socrates remarried. Aristotle considered his stepmother an interloper and never warmed to her. The happy family life he'd known with his mother was gone forever. 10 years later, in September 1922, an even greater catastrophe befell the Onassis family. Turkish troops recaptured Smyrna and set the city ablaze. The Great Fire of Smyrna destroyed the Greek and Armenian quarters of the city, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee. 16-year-old Aristotle watched his birthplace burn from the bridge of a ship. During the burning of the city, he lost 4 uncles, an aunt, and a cousin, who were burned to death in a church where 500 Christians had sought shelter. The family's fortune was destroyed overnight. Everything Socrates had built was gone. Along with the majority of ethnic Greeks, the Onassis family fled to Athens as refugees. They arrived with almost nothing. The comfortable life they'd known in Smyrna was over, replaced by uncertainty and poverty. For young Aristotle, watching his family's wealth and status disappear must have been a formative experience. It taught him that nothing was permanent, that everything could be lost in an instant. In August 1923, less than a year after arriving in Athens, 17-year-old Aristotle made a bold decision. He would leave Greece and seek his fortune elsewhere. Using a Nansen passport, a document issued to stateless refugees, he traveled to Buenos Aires, Argentina. He had a handful of dollars in his pocket and spoke no Spanish, but he had ambition and intelligence. That would have to be enough. In Buenos Aires, Aristotle took whatever work he could find. He worked as a dishwasher in restaurants, scrubbing pots until his hands were raw. He worked as a waiter, carrying trays and learning how the wealthy acted. Eventually, he landed a job as a night shift telephone operator. The job paid little, but for a clever young man, it was a goldmine of information. Aristotle was poor but brilliant. He eavesdropped on business calls, learning which businesses were thriving, which commodities were in demand, and who had money to spend. He absorbed information like a sponge. During the day, he transformed himself into an important businessman, wearing expensive clothes he could barely afford. At night, he worked the phone lines in coveralls. This ability to reinvent himself, to move between worlds, was an early indication of his shrewd social and business skills. His fortunes turned dramatically when he overheard a phone call about a new talking picture that would feature a character smoking cigarettes. Aristotle immediately understood what this meant. Talking pictures would make smoking glamorous, and demand for cigarettes would explode. He contacted manufacturers back in Turkey and began importing Turkish tobacco to Argentina. He worked both ends of the deal, importing the tobacco and then marketing it aggressively to Argentine distributors. The timing was perfect. Turkish tobacco became fashionable in Buenos Aires, and Aristotle's business grew rapidly. He reinvested every peso he earned, expanding his operations. By age 25, his tobacco company had made him a millionaire. He could have retired comfortably, but Aristotle wasn't interested in comfort. He wanted power. He wanted to prove that the refugee from Smyrna was more than equal to the men who had been born into wealth. But Aristotle had bigger ambitions. He noticed that the shipping magnates who transported the tobacco made more money than he did selling it. Why should he pay others to ship his goods when he could own the ships himself? This realization came during the Great Depression when most people were getting out of the shipping business. Banks were foreclosing on ships. Shipping companies were going bankrupt. International trade had collapsed. Everyone was selling and no one was buying, except Aristotle Onassis. In 1932, while the world economy was collapsing and people were standing in bread lines, Aristotle bought his first 6 freight ships for a fraction of their actual value. They were World War I relics anchored in the St. Lawrence River in Canada, purchased for only $3,775 each from the Canadian Steamship Company. Everyone thought he was crazy to buy ships when international trade was dying. But Aristotle saw opportunity where others saw disaster. He understood that the Depression wouldn't last forever, that trade would resume, and when it did, he would be positioned to dominate. He named his first 2 ships after his parents, the Onassis Penelope and the Onassis Socrates. It was a tribute to what his family had lost in Smyrna and a promise of what he would build. In 1938, he commissioned his first oil tanker, the Ariston, a 15,000-ton vessel built in Gothenburg, Sweden. He chartered it to Jean-Paul Getty's Tidewater Oil Company to transport oil between the United States and Japan. This marked the beginning of Onassis's relationship with the oil industry that would make him one of the richest men in the world. Onassis understood something fundamental. The world ran on oil, and oil had to be transported by sea. Whoever controlled the tankers would control the money. In 1939, Onassis made another shrewd move that would define his business model for decades. He established his first Panamanian company, Sociedad Maritima Miraflores Limited, registering his ships under the Panamanian flag. This gave him tax-free status and dramatically reduced his overhead costs, making him one of the lowest-cost shipping merchants in the world. When World War II broke out in September 1939, Onassis's 3rd tanker was in the final stages of construction in Sweden. The neutral Swedes grounded several foreign ships, including the Ariston, which caught Onassis off guard. But he adapted quickly. He leased his tankers to the Allies at reduced prices in exchange for favorable treatment and future concessions. While other shipping magnates lost their fleets to German U-boats, Onassis made strategic deals that positioned him for post-war dominance. After the war ended in 1945, Onassis moved aggressively to expand his fleet. He bought 23 surplus Liberty ships from the United States at bargain prices. These were cargo vessels that had been mass-produced during the war, and the U.S. government was eager to sell them. Onassis snapped them up and immediately put them to work. But he wasn't content with used ships. He embarked on an ambitious program to build progressively larger oil tankers that would revolutionize the industry. The shipping world had never seen anything like what Onassis was planning. He pioneered the construction of supertankers, massive vessels that could carry oil more efficiently than anything that had come before. In 1954 alone, he commissioned 17 such vessels. His insight was simple but profound. Bigger ships meant lower cost per ton of cargo, which meant higher profits. His competitors were stuck with smaller, older ships. Onassis was building the future. His fleet grew to rival the navies of many countries. At its peak, the Olympic fleet consisted of 67 vessels with a total of 2.5 million gross registered tons. Friends and foes alike recognized him as a pioneer in Greek-owned shipping. The newest tankers in his fleet were kept painted gleaming white at huge cost, a symbol of quality and prestige. Many had a piano installed in the owner's quarters. Onassis wanted his ships to be the best, and he didn't care about the expense. During the Arab-Israeli Wars in 1956 and 1967, when the Suez Canal was closed, Onassis's tankers reaped immense profits transporting oil from the Middle East via the Cape of Good Hope route. According to biographer Frankie Brady, Onassis's luck turned almost overnight when Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956. The canal remained closed for 6 months, causing a tremendous international bottleneck in the transport of goods. The impasse forced tankers to circumnavigate the entire continent of Africa. Brady wrote, Onassis had many extra ships, not under contract, that could be leased to handle the demand. He possessed the power to charge whatever rates he could. Prior to the canal blockage, transporting oil from Saudi Arabia to Europe cost $4 per ton. Onassis was charging over $60, with each tanker full earning him a profit of over $2 million per trip. He made more money in that shorter period than he had ever made in his life. It was the kind of windfall that comes once in a lifetime, and Onassis was positioned perfectly to capture it. By the 1950s, Aristotle Onassis was one of the wealthiest men on earth. He moved to Monaco and gained control of the Société des Bains de Mer, which owned the Monte Carlo Casino, the Hôtel de Paris, and one-third of the Principality's land. He established Olympic Maritime as his main shipping company. In 1956, he founded Olympic Airways, transforming Greece's struggling airline industry into a world-class operation. He turned the barren island of Scorpios into a private paradise where he hosted luminaries like Winston Churchill and Greta Garbo. In 1946, Onassis married Athena Mary Tina Livanos, daughter of shipping magnate Stavros G. Livanos. The marriage was more than love for Onassis. It was a statement. Tina came from old Greek shipping money, the aristocracy of the maritime world. By marrying her, Onassis proved to those who looked down on him that he was their equal, perhaps their superior. At the time of their marriage, Tina was 17 years old and Onassis was 40. The couple had 2 children, both born in New York City. Alexander, born on April the 30th, 1948, and Christina, born in 1950. Onassis named his legendary super yacht Christina O after his daughter. For a while, the marriage seemed solid. But by the mid-1950s, both Onassis and Tina were having affairs. The marriage was essentially over when Tina found her husband in bed with a friend of hers at their home, the Château de la Croix and Cap d'Antibes. The couple separated and would eventually divorce in June 1960. In 1957, Onassis met the woman who would become the great love of his life, Maria Callas, the legendary opera soprano. Callas was at the peak of her career, considered by many to be the greatest opera singer in the world. She had a voice that could break hearts and a presence that commanded every stage she walked onto. She was temperamental, passionate, and utterly magnetic. Onassis was mesmerized by her from the moment they met. Both Onassis and Callas were married to other people when they began their affair, but that didn't stop them. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Onassis was captivated by Callas's artistry and intensity. She, in turn, was drawn to his power and charisma. Their affair was passionate and intense in a way that neither had experienced before. It wasn't just physical attraction. They challenged each other intellectually, argued fiercely, and made up with equal passion. Onassis was so proud of his relationship with Callas that he flaunted it publicly, making no effort to hide their affair. He brought her aboard the Christina O, his legendary yacht, and introduced her to world leaders and business titans. The public humiliation devastated Tina, who was still technically his wife. But Onassis didn't care. He wanted the world to know that Maria Callas was his. Callas, for her part, left her husband, Giovanni Battista Meneghini, for Onassis. She gave up performing at the height of her powers to be with him, sacrificing her career for love. Opera houses around the world begged her to sing, but she turned them down to travel with Onassis. It was a decision she would later regret, but at the time she believed she was choosing lasting love over temporary fame. For nearly a decade, Onassis and Callis were inseparable. She traveled with him on the Christina O, attended his business meetings, and charmed his powerful friends with her intelligence and wit. She wasn't just a beautiful ornament on his arm. She was his intellectual equal, someone who could hold her own in conversations with prime ministers and presidents. They seemed destined to marry, and Callis waited patiently for Onassis to propose. But Onassis, for reasons that perhaps even he didn't fully understand, never did. He kept Callis in a state of uncertainty, promising marriage but never following through. Maybe he enjoyed the power of keeping her waiting. Maybe he wasn't ready to marry again after his difficult divorce from Tina. Or maybe, deep down, he knew that marrying Callis would limit his options, and Aristotle Onassis never liked to feel limited. In 1968, Aristotle Onassis shocked the world by marrying Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, the widow of President John F. Kennedy. Jackie had been America's queen, the elegant first lady who captured the nation's heart. When JFK was assassinated in 1963, the country mourned with her. 5 years later, she married a Greek shipping tycoon 23 years her senior, and America felt betrayed. The marriage was partly practical. Jackie wanted financial security and protection for herself and her two children, Caroline and John Jr. Onassis wanted the prestige of marrying American royalty. They had a prenuptial agreement that gave Jackie a substantial settlement. The wedding took place on October 20th, 1968, on Scorpios, Onassis's private island. It was a small ceremony, but the media attention was enormous. The American public reacted negatively. Some saw it as a betrayal of JFK's memory. Others simply couldn't understand why she would choose Onassis. For Maria Callas, the marriage was devastating. Onassis had promised her that they would be together, and then he married someone else. Callas was heartbroken. Rumors persisted that Onassis continued to visit Callas in Paris even after marrying Jackie, suggesting that his heart remained with the opera singer. The marriage to Jackie was troubled from the start. They maintained separate lives, inhabiting 6 residences between them, but rarely spending time together. His apartment in Paris at 88 Avenue Foch, her 15-room apartment at 1045th Avenue in New York City, her horse farm in New Jersey, his house in Athens, his house on Scorpios, and the Christina O yacht. Onassis had his business empire to run, constantly traveling between Monaco, Athens, and various ports around the world. Jackie had her own social life in New York, shopping on Madison Avenue, attending the theater, and seeing old Kennedy family friends. They were more like business partners sharing assets than husband and wife sharing a life. The relationship that had begun as a transaction never evolved into genuine partnership. Onassis expected Jackie to play the role of dutiful wife, accompanying him to business dinners and entertaining on Scorpios. Jackie expected financial security and the freedom to live her life as she chose. When their expectations didn't align, tensions flared. Both Alexander and Christina were upset by their father's marriage to Jackie, feeling that she had replaced their mother in ways they couldn't accept. Alexander, in particular, was openly hostile to Jackie, viewing her as an interloper who had married his father for money. Christina was more circumspect, but no less resentful. On January 22, 1973, tragedy struck in a way that would destroy Aristotle Onassis. His son Alexander, who was 24 years old, boarded a Piaggio P-136L2 amphibious aircraft at Hellinikon International Airport in Athens. Alexander was president of Olympic Aviation, a subsidiary of Olympic Airways, and he was overseeing a recruiting test for a potential pilot named Donald McCusker. Alexander's regular pilot, Donald McGregor, was also aboard, recovering from an eye infection. Alexander had poor eyesight that prevented him from holding an air transport license, but he had accumulated 1,500 flying hours since taking his first flying lesson in 1967. He was an accomplished pilot despite the limitations of his vision. That day should have been routine. A few seconds after takeoff from runway 33, the plane's right wing dropped and stayed down. The aircraft lost control and crashed in a flight lasting no more than 15 seconds. All three men were seriously injured. Alexander suffered severe head trauma. They were rushed to the hospital. Aristotle Onassis was in New York when he received the devastating news. He collapsed from shock before swiftly making arrangements to fly to Athens. The following day, January 23rd, he arrived and went directly to the hospital where Alexander was being treated. Tina arrived from Switzerland with her husband, Stavros Niarchos, Onassis's business rival, who had married Tina after her divorce from her second husband. Jackie was there too, having flown in with Onassis. Onassis had flown renowned English neurosurgeon Alan Richardson from London to Athens, desperate for hope. But Richardson examined Alexander and told Onassis the truth. His son had no chance of surviving his injuries. Despite all efforts and all of Onassis's money and power, there was nothing that could save Alexander. He died on January 23, 1973, from a brain hemorrhage 27 hours after the crash. Onassis was shattered. Alexander had been his heir, the one who would carry on his empire. More than that, Alexander had been his son, and despite their sometimes difficult relationship, Onassis loved him deeply. He had Alexander's body embalmed and buried next to the chapel on Scorpios. Onassis refused to believe his son's death was an accident. In his grief and paranoia, he became convinced that Alexander had been murdered. He blamed the CIA, the Greek military junta, even his rival Stavros Niarchos. He accused Olympic Airways employees of sabotaging the plane. In December 1974, Onassis took out a paid advertisement offering a $1 million reward for proof that Alexander's death had been deliberate rather than the result of negligence. McCusker and 6 Olympic Airways engineers were indicted for allegedly fitting faulty controls to the plane. The trial dragged on for years. Eventually, all charges were dropped, and in 1978, 3 years after Onassis's death, McCusker was awarded $800,000 by Olympic Airways. The official inquiry concluded that the crash was caused by reversed aileron connecting cables during the construction of a new control column, a tragic accident, not murder. But Onassis never accepted that conclusion. Onassis was very superstitious. He blamed Jackie for bringing bad luck into the family, noting that both John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy had been murdered. He saw curses and conspiracies everywhere. The rational businessman who had built an empire through shrewd calculation was replaced by a grieving father who couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all. After Alexander's death, Onassis deteriorated rapidly. He was 67 years old and had been diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, a chronic autoimmune neuromuscular disease that causes muscle weakness. The stress and grief accelerated his decline. He lost interest in his business empire. He tried to sell Olympic Airways but couldn't find a buyer. His marriage to Jackie, already strained, collapsed completely. Onassis's will was carefully constructed to limit Jackie's inheritance. He stipulated that if she contested the will, she would receive only the minimal spousal bequest dictated by Greek law, 12.5%. After his death, Christina settled with Jackie for $25 million in exchange for her not contesting the will. On March 15, 1975, Aristotle Onassis died at the American Hospital of Paris in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France. He was 69 years old. The official cause of death was respiratory failure, a complication of the myasthenia gravis from which he had suffered in his final years. But everyone knew the real cause: a broken heart. Alexander's death had killed him, just more slowly. Onassis was buried alongside his son on Scorpios. His daughter Christina inherited 55% of his fortune, while the remaining 45%, what would have been Alexander's share, was used to create the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation. The foundation, based in Vaduz, Liechtenstein, and headquartered in Athens, funds the worldwide promotion of Greek culture, awards international prizes for achievement in various fields, and provides scholarships for Greek university students. The estate Onassis left behind was valued at over $500 million, though some estimates placed his total wealth much higher. He had been one of the richest men in the world, a self-made tycoon who rose from refugee to shipping magnate through intelligence, timing, and ruthless ambition. Christina Onassis inherited her father's fortune, but not his business acumen or his will to live. She struggled with weight problems, depression, and failed marriages. In November 1988, at age 37, Christina died in Argentina of a heart attack, though some suspected suicide. With her death, the direct Onassis line ended. Maria Callas never recovered from Onassis's betrayal. She lived out her remaining years in Paris, a shadow of the vibrant woman she had once been. She died in September 1977 at age 53, alone in her apartment. Some said she died of a broken heart. Her great love had chosen prestige over passion, and it destroyed her. Looking back at Aristotle Onassis's life, it's a story of spectacular rise and tragic fall. He escaped the burning of Smyrna as a penniless refugee and built one of the world's great fortunes. He married a shipping heiress, had a passionate affair with opera's greatest diva, and wed America's most famous widow. He lived on his own island, flew his own airline, and moved among the world's most powerful people. But all his wealth couldn't protect him from tragedy. His son died in a plane crash. His daughter struggled with demons that eventually killed her. His marriages failed. The woman he truly loved died alone and heartbroken. In 2000, Lloyd's List of London named him the world's leading shipowner of the 20th century, but the title rang hollow. 50 years after his death, Aristotle Onassis remains a symbol of both the heights wealth can reach and the depths tragedy can plunge. He proved that a refugee with nothing but intelligence and ambition could conquer the world. But he also proved that money can't buy immunity from grief, and that sometimes the price of success is higher than anyone should have to pay. If you enjoyed learning about Aristotle Onassis's remarkable and tragic story, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from history. Share your thoughts about Onassis in the comments below. Thanks for watching.